You're tuned into That's Life, where we celebrate the beauty, the chaos, and the wonder of real life. Sometimes it makes you laugh, sometimes it makes you cry, but it always makes you feel. Settle in, we're just getting started. The quiet park by the fountain beckoned with coolness and peace. David sat down on a bench, inhaling the sense of greenery and water, letting the day's fatigue recede. Above his head, the crowns of poplars met, forming a living arch through which sunbeams broke through scattering golden dust. It felt as though he had stepped into the scenery of a magical fairy tale, where time had slowed its pace. Around him, the park's own life bustled. Some hurried, absorbed in thoughts of their affairs. Others enjoyed a leisurely stroll. Young mothers with strollers, cheerful and lively, created an atmosphere of serenity. Children on scooters and bikes darted along the paths, adding movement and joy to the picture. This peaceful urban landscape awakened in David memories of his childhood spent in the park of a small town. There, under the watchful eye of his beloved grandmother, his brightest years had passed. They walked, fed the birds, had long conversations about everything in the world. Grandmother always found a way to please her grandson, be it a fresh bun from the bakery or a scoop of ice cream. In the park, he often met friends from the yard who were also out with their families. Grandmother and grandfather invented fun games by the fountain or among the old trees. It was a time of amazing lightness and serenity when the world seemed simple and kind. Remembering his grandmother, David smiled habitually, feeling a bright sadness. Now he could think of her without the sharp pain that had tormented him immediately after her passing. It happened when he was already a student, but the loss was unbearable. Grandmother Eleanor was perhaps the closest and most understanding person in his life. Her support meant more to him than anything. He often caught himself thinking of her, especially at turning points in his destiny. He wondered how she would have reacted to his decisions, regretting that he couldn't share the joy of his victories with her. And there were many victories: a degree with honors, a successful career as an engineer, everything his grandmother had dreamed of. It was she who first saw in little David not just a constructor builder, but a future engineer with a brilliant mind. Grandmother noticed his intuitive sense of proportion and aptitude for mathematics, even before school. He's a future talented engineer. A great future awaits him, she would say proudly, while his mother only smiled, considering it a manifestation of blind love. But grandmother turned out to be right, though not about everything. David indeed turned out to be a gifted mathematician, which became clear from the first grade. While classmates struggled with the simplest problems, he easily handled assignments for older students. The teacher gave him additional exercises, and his grandmother, a decent mathematician herself and a former employee of an architectural bureau, tutored him at home. She was proud, believing that the talent was inherited from her. "Oh, it's a shame grandfather doesn't see what you become," she would sigh, looking at his certificates from math Olympiads. Grandfather, a respected surgeon, died when David was only a few months old. Grandmother often told stories about him, creating a vivid image in the boy's mind, supplemented by countless photographs. Thus, the grandfather he had never seen was still present in his life. But David didn't know his father at all. The growing boy, who so lacked a male presence, began to ask questions. Grandmother and mother, kind and caring, evaded the answer, changed the subject, or cited being busy. One day, his mother couldn't bear it anymore and told him the bitter truth. His father, a visitor from Arkhangelsk, met her at a disco, promised the moon, and disappeared upon learning of the pregnancy. A common story, his mother sighed, admitting her thoughtlessness. She decided to keep the child no matter what, and her parents supported her. Later, his father reappeared in their town, coming for work. He looked for David's mother, but saw her with an already rounded belly and ran away again. All his mother knew about him was his name and city, and even that was questionable. He never looked for them, although he knew where they lived. He got scared and ran away, his mother concluded, feeling humiliated by this ugly story. David, old enough to understand her pain and shame, stopped dreaming of meeting a hero father. His mother's confession shattered his illusions, replacing them with a bitter reality. Until he was about 10, David lived with his grandmother, then moved in with his mother, who rented an apartment closer to the math lyceum. It was easier to get to school that way, and a nanny in the form of his grandmother was no longer needed. But David still went to her every weekend, missing his room, his cat Oliver, and the warm atmosphere of childhood. At the new lyceum, he was struck by his first love, strong and unrequited. The object of his adoration was Vicky from another class, whom he saw in physical education. David, an excellent student in all subjects except PE, had never liked these lessons until their class started being combined with the 6th grade B. Vicky was impossible not to notice. Tall, slender, light, and graceful as a panther. David watched her movements in fascination, admiring her long, shiny hair, the color of melted chocolate. In PE, she always tied it in a high ponytail, revealing perfect facial features. A straight nose, dark, arched eyebrows, full lips, and huge turquoise eyes, shining on her tanned skin like two lakes. Vicky knew of her beauty, and crowds of admirers always swarmed around her. She was friendly and welcoming to everyone, but she didn't let anyone get too close, which secretly pleased David. He himself was not among her obvious admirers. He lacked the courage. Popular boys, handsome, athletic, confident, and witty, nothing like him, circled around her. Grandmother Eleanor was right. David's talent fully blossomed within the walls of the specialized school. Teachers praised him, gave him extra lessons, and assigned complex problems. He quickly became the one you could copy homework from, and he never refused anyone, for which he was respected in class. Word of his mathematical abilities spread beyond the class, and one day, during break, she approached him, Vicky, in a black dress with a white collar that emphasized her slenderness. She looked stunning. David was completely flustered by her proximity. "Hi," Vicky smiled radiantly. "My name is Vicky. Our PE class is at the same time as yours. Do you remember me?" she was asking. David just nodded weakly, unable to utter a word. Vicky had come up to him herself. She was talking to him. It seemed unreal. but incredibly pleasant. You see, Vicky continued, slightly embarrassed, the math teacher gave us a difficult test, and this is a crucial grade for me. If I get a C, that's it, a C for the quarter, my mom will kill me. Can you help me out? David was ready to move mountains for her, let alone solve a test. He, of course, agreed. Joy flashed in her turquoise eyes. Thank you, Vicky exclaimed and hugged him in a rush. You really are great. It's not for nothing that the girls from your class say so. After this incident, they didn't become friends, but David suddenly began to exist for her. She noticed him in the corridors, greeted him warmly. Sometimes they exchanged glances in PE. Less often, she would talk to him about something insignificant, but that didn't matter. The main thing was that she noticed him. In ninth grade, Vicky started dating Mark, the captain of the local football team. That year, many couples formed at school, probably because of the age. Seeing them together, David felt an unpleasant feeling, similar to jealousy. He was still in love with Vicky, and this childish feeling only grew stronger, developing into something new and powerful. Other girls didn't interest him, although some classmates clearly liked the smart and pleasant guy. Had he shown the slightest initiative, they would have gladly gone on a date with him. But his thoughts were occupied by the unattainable Vicky. How happy he was when rumors spread through the Lyceum that Mark had left Vicky for an older student. Vicky, as if in retaliation, almost immediately started dating a guy older than her too. He would pick her up after school in his own car, handsome, stylish, like a character from a TV show. Vicky, with shining eyes, would flutter into his beautiful car, and the couple would drive away. The girls envied Vicky, saying her boyfriend was the son of wealthy parents. Vicky is so lucky. He's crazy about her. When she turns 18, they'll get married. Our Vicky got a ticket to a happy life. At that time, many dreamed of meeting a prince who would shower them with gifts, not understanding that there's no such thing as a free lunch. David felt like a nobody compared to Vicky's new admirer. How could he compete with such a prince with a car and rich parents? He was just an ordinary guy. And then there was graduation, university admission. Life spun on. Out of the corner of his eye, Vicky surfaced in his thoughts at the first alumni reunion 2 years later. David learned that the girl's predictions had come true. Vicky married her suitor right at 18. She didn't go to university. Her father-in-law got her a job as a secretary in his firm. Vicky earned fabulous money, drove her own car, lived in a luxurious apartment in the center, and often flew abroad. She had brought the collective dream of the local girls to life. How lucky, former classmates repeated, listening to Vicky's story, who hadn't come herself, vacationing with her husband in the Maldives. David returned home in a sad mood. He had come to the evening for Vicky's sake, hoping to see her, maybe even talk. Over the years, he had matured, become more confident, thinking that the relationship with the rich kid was behind her and he had a chance. But no. Now she was a married lady with a completely different life that everyone envied. Life spun him around again. Studies, exams, Olympiads, projects. As a promising specialist, he was hired part-time by a large oil company, Spectrum Corp, while still a student. Salaries there were several times higher than average, and at first, David even felt dizzy from the sums. He had to work hard, combining study and work, but he managed to stoino. His grandmother and mother predicted a great future for him. They were proud of him. Then only his mother was proud because his grandmother was suddenly gone. David fell into apathy, from which he was pulled out by his beloved work and the thought that his grandmother wouldn't have wanted to see him like that. She dreamed that he would live life to the fullest, rejoice, and develop. It seemed to David that he had forgotten Vicky. Memories of his first love remained, but the torment was gone. He even started dating Nina, a girl from his university a year younger. They met at a conference and the relationship quickly became serious. Nina was sweet, kind, open, intelligent, and interested in modern architecture. David knew that Nina was genuinely in love with him. It was in her eyes, felt in her touch. It was pleasant to know that someone loved him so much. He himself didn't feel dizzying emotions towards her, nothing like what he felt for Vicky, but he understood Nina well. Her attention touched him. Her admiration was captivating. He wanted to take care of Nina. He liked to please her, to bring a smile to her face. They agreed on important things. They often understood each other without words, finished each other's sentences. It was a complete idyll, and David thought that was enough. He considered his school feelings for Vicky, teenage passions, and his adult life, calm and reliable with Nina, seemed right. The young couple wasn't in a hurry to get married. It was a mutual decision. They were happy together, and both wanted to establish their careers. No one doubted that they would get married sooner or later. It was decided. David finished university first and immediately got a full-time position at Spectrum Corp. His salary increased many times over. Nina also got her diploma and, on the recommendation of the rector, got a job at an architectural bureau. Her eyes shone when she talked about her work, and David understood her enthusiasm, feeling the same way. Nina moved in with David into his own apartment, which he had managed to buy and renovate. They lived like a normal family, planning a wedding because they had been together for a long time, and everything was going according to plan. They decided to postpone having children, but to formalize their relationship. Nina dreamed of a summer wedding, a light dress, a photo shoot by the river, and David supported her, although the details of the wedding interested him little, absorbed as he was in a major new project. It happened in February. Nina went to her parents in a neighboring town. She had accumulated days off. That day, David and his colleagues secured a large sum for an important project and decided to celebrate. Leo, one of the colleagues, suggested a bar in the city center, promising the best live music, beer, and beautiful girls. The bar was crowded, but Leo, being a regular, found them a comfortable sofa in the corner. They sat, talked, joked, made plans for the future, and then David saw her, Vicky. His head spun, his pulse quickened. Just like in his youth, she still had a huge influence on him. His feelings hadn't gone anywhere. Vicky had changed, but she was still just as captivating. She was standing by the bar, talking to the waitress, smiling. It was her smile, her long hair, the color of milk chocolate, her turquoise eyes in her beautiful face. But now there was something new, elusive in them. Perhaps sadness, perhaps anxiety. Vicky was wearing an emerald dress and bulky winter sneakers, creating an elegant, semi-sporty look. Dave, look! Leo was waiting for his opinion, but David was looking at Vicky, noticing nothing around him. So, you saw someone you know? A looker? Leo assessed, following his gaze, and returned to his story. Vicky walked further into the corner of the hall, invisible from his seat. David didn't want to lose sight of her, got up, and hurried after her. He saw Vicky slip into a back room and decided to wait. Sure, she would come out soon. Nervous, he ran phrases through his head, not knowing how to start a conversation. Vicky fluttered out of the back room, but in a waitress uniform, a black t-shirt, fitted jeans, a gray apron, a name tag with the name Victoria. A waitress? How was that possible? She had married a rich man. She should be living a high life. The girl was about to walk past, but David called out to her, "Vicky, is that you?" She stopped, looked at him carefully, and became flustered. Recognition flickered in her eyes. Vicky smiled awkwardly. "Well, yes, it's me and you. David? Wow, you've changed. You're so interesting." Now she wasn't shy. "In school, you were a typical nerd. Tall, thin, unremarkable. Years often benefit you men." David blossomed at the compliment. Vicky clearly liked him. It was incredible. He immediately felt more confident and energized. "Are you working here?" he clarified. As you can see, Vicky sighed, the smile leaving her face. Life is a strange thing, unpredictable. Who would have thought everything would turn out this way? "Did something happen?" David asked. "Something happened. It's an ugly story. But everything happens for a reason. I always say that. How about you? What are you doing?" "I work at Spectrum Corp." "Ah, right. I heard from someone." "Well, good for you. You were always smart and driven." Vicky stood very close, saying pleasant things and looking at him with interest, admiration, warmth, and tenderness. "And we're here celebrating a corporate event with colleagues," David explained for some reason, gesturing toward the table. "Well, that's great. How much longer do you plan to stay here?" David shrugged. "It'll get less crowded toward the end of the shift. We can talk, okay?" It's so nice to meet someone from childhood. That was the best time. All evening, Vicky was busy, rushing around with trays, smiling at tipsy men, joking back. They often met each other's eyes, and David's heart was flooded with tenderness. It was a silent dialogue with a girl who, it turned out, still meant a lot to him. Once, she hadn't noticed him, and now she herself suggested chatting after her shift. David's colleagues were getting ready to go home. He went out to see them off to the taxi. "Why aren't you going?" Leo asked, surprised. "No, I'll stay here a bit longer." "Got it," Leo smiled conspiratorially. "Yeah, the friend, the looker with the tray. Just don't forget you have Nina." David thought about it. Nina, kind, smart, loyal. It would be unpleasant for her to know that her fiancé was staying at a bar for his first love. On the other hand, he wasn't doing anything wrong. He just wanted to know how Vicky became a waitress. Closer to closing, there were few people left in the bar, and Vicky was finally able to sit down with him. She looked tired, but even more attractive because of it. "Oh, that was a tough shift," she smiled. "Can I order you something?" "No, thank you. Then I'd have to bring it myself, and I'd rather just sit here. My feet are killing me. Waitresses rarely wear heels in bars." "It suits you," David said. "Thanks, but a waitress uniform isn't what I want to wear, of course. Then why? Well, fate turned out this way. You know, I married Max right after school, the guy I dated in high school. David nodded. He had heard about it. Well, there you go. At first, everything was like a fairy tale. A huge apartment, a loving, handsome, caring husband who drove me everywhere in an expensive foreign car, constantly gave me gifts, a car regularly topped up with substantial sums. Travel, work. Max's father took me into his firm as a secretary. All my work consisted of recording calls and making coffee. I sat in a beautiful office, read novels, played games, painted my nails. I changed outfits constantly. Well, it was beautiful, and I got a more than decent salary. What about studying? Didn't you go anywhere? Studying. I didn't even think about it then. A completely different life began for me. Beautiful, bright, rich. It seemed it would always be like that. Time passed, and the always attentive Max changed. He started staying late at work. Endless business trips began, from which he returned with a bronze tan. Vicky, absorbed in her new life, didn't notice it right away. And when she did, she got scared. Only then did it dawn on her. Her happiness was fragile and illusory, completely dependent on Max. His love, which seemed reliable, was drifting away. Vicky tried to fix the situation. Luxurious lingerie, culinary delights, unusual gifts, even talking about a child. Max perceived her efforts with complete indifference. Only the conversation about a child angered him a little. We're not ready yet. It's too early to think about children. One day, Vicky got into his phone and stumbled upon correspondence with his mistress, Christine. The messages and photos were eloquent. Vicky expected excuses, but Max merely shrugged, considering having a mistress a common thing in life. In his world, men earn money and do what they want. Women endure and serve. Vicky was even ready to put up with it for the sake of a beautiful life. But she felt Christine was a threat. She tried to talk to her husband cautiously, making it clear that his behavior was unacceptable, but the tactic didn't work. One day, a scandal erupted. Max called a spade, reminded Vicky where he had taken her from and what she had gained from their union, explaining that everything had a price. Vicky felt worthless. She wasn't afraid of losing Max. He had become repulsive to her. She was only afraid of losing the new life she had grown accustomed to. And so I put up with it. Vicky sighed, looking at David. I was disgusted with myself sometimes. But I lived with Max, pretending to be a model wife and professing otherworldly love when needed. That's how it was. Vicky endured endless infidelities and neglect in exchange for unlimited money. Instead of saving up for her own business or apartment, she spent everything on entertainment, clothes, clubs, trips, perfume, everything that helped her distract herself and feel happy. But more and more often, she felt longing and a chilling emptiness. Drinking helped her forget, but only for a short time. And then Max casually announced the divorce. Vicky felt as if she had been punched in the gut. She realized she would have to return to her parents' apartment, as all the property was in Max's father's name. No profession, no savings, just a shabby Khrushchev-era apartment, a perpetually drunk father, and a controlling mother. A banal story. It's my own fault, Vicky sighed sadly again. Sorry for opening up to you like this. It just burst out. I'm tired of keeping everything inside, and you were always good. understanding, too wise for your years. It's nice to talk to you like this. The story turned out to be comically banal. Max met a young beauty. She got pregnant and caught him at the right time. He decided to get rid of Vicky before his passion for the young nymphet faded. So Vicky returned home but couldn't live with her parents. She sold her designer clothes, pawned her jewelry. It was enough for 6 months' rent. She had no education, so she got a job as a waitress in a bar. I like it here, Vicky finally smiled. The music is good, people are cheerful, it's even fun. I'm so sorry, David said sympathetically. That's hard. Max played with a pretty toy, found a new one, and just got rid of the old one. It's awful. It's okay. At least we didn't manage to have kids with that Max. He always treated me condescendingly, looked down on me. And back then, stupid and young as I was, I thought it was his care, his patronage, his love. Nothing of the sort. His new wife is unlikely to be happy with him. So I'm even glad I got rid of him. Really. Vicky looked into David's eyes. Tell me about yourself. Do you have someone? No, David lied for some reason. I don't have anyone. I'm free. Looking at Vicky, he couldn't tell her about Nina. Nina seemed distant and alien right now. They sat for a long time, reminiscing about the past, mutual acquaintances. David easily confessed his long-standing school crush. I wish I had known that. That's exactly what I was looking for. Sincere feelings, love. But the guys who swarmed around me, you understand, they only wanted one thing. I thought that's how it always was. Then they walked through the night city, not wanting to part. David put his arm around Vicky's shoulders, and she leaned against him trustingly. She invited him to her place. She was renting an apartment nearby. David agreed, and so they spent the night together, their first night. In the morning, David felt truly happy. She was by his side. An unprecedented surge of energy, a lightness in his soul. Thoughts of Nina didn't cloud his mood. He would talk to her, explain everything. Nina was smart. She would understand. It was just that dreams had to come true. Otherwise, life lost its meaning. They started seeing each other. David told Vicky about Nina, hiding nothing, wanting to be honest. Vicky was upset, tense. Distrust flickered in her eyes. This has happened to me before, she said in a low voice. There was a man in my life who promised he would divorce his wife for me. He didn't. This is a completely different situation, and we're not even married. The conversation with Nina was long and difficult. David sweated, as if he had unloaded 3 tons of coal. The always calm Nina became hysterical, sobbing, begging him to reconsider, cursing him and Vicky. David's heart ached looking at his former fiancée. It seemed Nina really loved him. Later, David learned from acquaintances that Nina couldn't bear the breakup and tried to commit suicide. Fortunately, she was saved and revived. She spent time in the hospital, seeing psychiatrists. Because of this impulsive act, she lost her prestigious job. David felt guilty, but how could he help her? How could... No one is obliged to sacrifice their happiness and dreams for another person. No one is obliged, Vicky reassured him. She immediately moved in with him. They didn't want to be apart. David offered Nina help through friends, but she proudly refused. She no longer wanted to hear about her former fiancé, considering his actions vile and treacherous, even though he had told her everything right away. One way or another, things turned out wonderfully for Nina. She recovered, found a job, got married, and had two beautiful boys. David was happy for her, even tried to call, but realized it was pointless. Years passed and joyful events happened in her life. David and Vicky also got married. The passion subsided a little. Everything settled down. David was happy, thinking that things would only get better from now on. Vicky quit her job, and David supported this decision. He didn't like his wife working nights in a bar, smiling at tipsy men. He was jealous. Plus, he could easily support the family, and the house became cozier. Now, when David returned from work, it was always tidy and smelled of delicious food. Vicky was wonderful, beautiful, graceful, the best. David forgave her small weaknesses, whims, demanding nature, complaints, considering them charming. Beautiful women were allowed more. And then something unforeseen happened. Spectrum Corp went bankrupt. Competitors had played their part. It was a long and dark story. Spectrum Corp was bought out, divided, ruined. People were laid off. David was suddenly left without a job. He was quickly invited to a factory. A specialist of his level was known in the city. But the salary offered was 5 times less. It was still above average, but they had to tighten their belts. Vicky was used to spending large sums on fitness, spa, shopping, cosmetology, restaurants, trips to the sea. All this stopped, and for her, the decline in the quality of life was a tragedy. David had no prospects in this city. Vicky tried to push her husband into starting his own business. Come on, why not? You need a different kind of character for that. I'm not like that, he answered honestly. He didn't see himself leading a business. He didn't have that kind of drive, but he was an excellent performer. Yeah, for that, you need backbone like Max. Vicky shook her head disappointedly. It hurt David to be compared to Max and not in his favor. But he never once reminded her how and why her relationship with her ex-husband ended. Now Vicky fundamentally refused to do housework, even though she wasn't working. I didn't sign up to be a free maid, she declared. David sighed and cooked and cleaned himself. He forgave her unfair reproaches. The main thing was to save the relationship. And then Vicky announced she was expecting a child. The man was happy, thinking that the baby would bring them closer. But the future mother was clearly not thrilled. She even thought about termination. David talked her out of it. The pregnancy was difficult. Vicky felt unwell, was often sick. Her mood constantly changed. She blamed everything on David, who couldn't provide for his wife and child, and that's why she was suffering. The man felt guilty, but he couldn't earn more. His salary was already decent for the city. Only Vicky needed more. David thought that after the child was born, Vicky would change. Pregnant women's hormones are all over the place, but then everything goes back to normal. But no, Milana appeared, and Vicky fell into prolonged apathy. Her daughter didn't bring her joy. Her only feeling toward the newborn was irritation. When David came home, he often found a terrible scene. His daughter crying in her playpen while Vicky was on social media with headphones on. The man cautiously tried to talk to her about parenting, trying not to offend her. A child at this age needs attention, warmth, care. Are you suggesting I spoil her? Vicky flared up. Pick her up every time she whimpers, coo at her nonstop, forgetting about myself? No, of course not. But Vicky interrupted him. showering him with accusations, making him feel worthless. She screamed that she needed a break, that he couldn't send her to the sea or hire a nanny. You have no right to tell me anything at all, so just be quiet. There was so much hatred and contempt in her voice and gaze that David was lost, not knowing how to comfort her. He felt like a complete failure. It hurt to realize that the person he loved saw him as such a pathetic loser. He knew how sweet Vicky could be when there was money in the house. That meant it was his fault. He couldn't provide for the family. Coming home, David readily took on household chores, cooking, cleaning, playing with his daughter. He even enjoyed it. Milana, in his arms, had missed her dad. Order was restored in the house. It was pleasant. David hired a nanny since his wife found it so difficult. But Vicky was still unhappy. She didn't get along with the first nanny, who had the audacity to point out Vicky's shortcomings in handling the child. With the second nanny, it was easier. Vicky went shopping and to spa salons. Of course, she couldn't live life to the fullest as before. But David tried to ensure his wife's card always had money for her entertainment. He understood that women on maternity leave needed to relax, but Vicky's behavior could hardly be called relaxation. Vicky lived some kind of life of her own. She only came home to sleep. Sometimes she would show up drunk and cheerful in the early morning. David worried about her, still loved her, and hoped it was a postpartum condition. Although Milana was almost a year old, you never knew. He saw how other mothers behaved when he walked with his daughter, went to clinics. Women looked at their babies with love, handled them gently, cooed. Milana didn't see any of that. Her mother was absolutely cold and indifferent, only touching her out of necessity. She might come, play with Milana, or sing her songs, recite poems, only if she felt like it herself. David even tried to start a business, thinking that money would fix everything and Vicky would become her old self. But as expected, nothing came of it. He only lost his savings. He was already thinking about a family therapist, feeling that the problems could no longer be hidden. He found a specialist, but before he could talk to his wife, something happened that changed everything. One day, David stayed late at work, returning later than usual. Vicky still wasn't home. The nanny was with Milana, a saintly woman who patiently endured the irregular hours and didn't comment on Vicky's antics. It was Friday. Vicky was surely at a club with friends. She had long since stopped feeling the need to inform her husband. David let the nanny go and prepared dinner. Milana was sleeping soundly. Poor child, deprived of maternal love, and her perpetually busy father couldn't give her enough attention. The man constantly worried about this. His child lacked the warmth of loved ones. David entered the bedroom and looked around. His heart tightened with the premonition of trouble. Something was wrong. Finally, he understood. Vicky's things were much fewer. He rushed to the closet, the dressing table. Many things were missing. The jewelry box, her favorite designer dresses, small items. Vicky had taken only her most loved and valuable possessions. This list clearly didn't include her husband. A little later, in the kitchen cupboard, David found a note that explained everything. It turned out Vicky had met a businessman from Germany, George, on social media. Their correspondence quickly grew into something serious. George was fascinated by Vicky's appearance, her sensuality, her tenderness. Vicky knew how to present herself in a favorable light. David sighed heavily, thinking, would George look at her like that if he lost his fortune? George had come to see Vicky several times. They met, fell in love, made plans. In short, Vicky left him. She filed for divorce, wrote a waiver of her daughter, and had the document officially notarized. It lay right there, under the note, written proof of what David already knew. Vicky didn't want Milana. Vicky couldn't bring herself to say it all to his face. She did it this way. David felt the ground give way beneath him. He still loved Vicky. Even like that, distant, cold, capricious. He hoped she would come to her senses, become her old self, and they would be happy. He had almost no doubt about it. But Vicky left. She abandoned him, left Milana. She ran away to a new life, bright, prosperous, interesting. In the note, Vicky asked him not to look for her. Milana, do with her what you want. Raise her yourself or put her in an orphanage. You also have the right to give her up and start a new life. This child was a big mistake. And our marriage apparently too. It seemed to me back then when we met by chance in the bar. It just seemed that something was possible between us. It didn't work out. We are completely different, not suited for each other. But I still wish you personal happiness. Be happy, just like me. That was it. David couldn't believe Vicky was like that. A real monster, cold and calculating. Put Milana in an orphanage? He had no one closer than his daughter now. Before it seemed there was still Vicky, that she would recover, become sweet, caring, loyal. Financial difficulties were common. They weren't poor, just couldn't throw money around like before. They had everything they needed. David reluctantly admitted Vicky was with him only for the money. She was in a desperate situation and was looking for someone to pull her out of poverty, to support her. And such a person was found. Vicky was happy for a while, wrapping the smitten David around her finger. When he lost his high-paying job and had less money, she started looking for another option. And the child wasn't an obstacle. Vicky indeed never showed up again. She lived in Germany. David saw photos on social media. He tried to contact her, but was blocked. Vicky wasn't interested in her daughter. David couldn't understand this. He thought that with time, her heart would ache for the little one. But no. David submitted to fate until it took another sharp turn. A year later, Milana was diagnosed with a rare blood disease. Genetics debuted, as the professor explained. It would have happened sooner or later. Milana was 4 years old. Endless examinations and treatments began. It seemed to David that he needed to sort things out before school, find therapy, stabilize her condition. He thought medicine was strong. They couldn't not help. But the disease was rare and insidious, spoiling the girl's blood. Milana constantly felt tired and nauseous. The nanny, who took care of her around the clock, worried and cried. Looking at this kind woman, David thought of Vicky. She didn't even know what trouble her daughter was in. And if she did, would she help? The man tried to reach his ex-wife again. She didn't want to know about him. George married her. They had a small son, Milana's little brother. According to photos on social media, Vicky was a doting mother to this child. This gave him hope. Perhaps now she understood how important a mother is to a child. Maybe the news of her daughter's illness wouldn't leave her indifferent. Maybe she would help, find a German professor, and Milana would get better. But Vicky categorically refused to communicate with her ex-husband and know about her daughter. David managed to tell her what had happened through one of Vicky's friends. She asked me to tell you to forget about her existence, as if she doesn't exist at all, as if she died, the friend relayed. After this conversation, David understood that he would have to rely only on himself. There was no hope for Vicky. She had completely erased her ex-husband and daughter from her life. David continued the fight for Milana's health on his own. He had no one closer or dearer than her. Milana grew up a daddy's girl, looking at him with eyes as if she saw an omnipotent demigod. David couldn't let her down. Milana grew up kind and smiling. Despite her illness, she tried to enjoy life. David was amazed by the simple things that brought her delight: a butterfly on a leaf, the dance of snowflakes, a creeping cat. "Daddy, look how beautiful." The little girl pointed with her finger at things that had previously evoked no feelings in David. And he understood that, yes, his daughter was right. These were stunning scenes. David tried to spend every free minute with his daughter. He liked listening to her thoughts, making plans. Milana dreamed of becoming an artist and traveling the world with exhibitions. Looking at her drawings, David understood. It was possible she had talent. He enrolled her in a preschool circle, but she couldn't attend due to her illness. The illness took her strength and made her susceptible to infections. But Dave found a way. He invited a drawing teacher to their home. The middle-aged woman immediately fell in love with Milana. This radiant little girl responded to tenderness, but she didn't get better. On the contrary, over the years, the disease progressed. The disease is rare, little studied, genetic. Genetics is always complicated. The girl drew an unlucky ticket, he heard from doctors. Everyone said the same thing. Only a few study it. The queues are kilometers long. The treatment is expensive. Each case is individual. But some manage to achieve remission. Nothing helps others. David knew all the professors dealing with his daughter's illness. In Russia, there were two, Dr. Miller and Dr. Davis, both in Moscow. It was impossible to get to either. Huge queues, consultations were expensive, their schedules were booked a year in advance. David called every week, heard the same answer. No appointments, call back in a month or two. Hope was almost gone. He tried to contact foreign professors, but it was even more difficult there. David felt devastated and powerless. He looked at his daughter. Milana was wasting away every day, becoming weaker, paler. Shadows appeared under her turquoise eyes. It was unbearable to watch. David secured a transfer to the Moscow Research Institute of Hematology for supportive treatment. This didn't solve the problem, but it bought time. David literally fought tooth and nail for this time. He knew even medical luminaries might not help, but he had to try. There were patients who recovered. There were chances. If only he could get through to the professors, reach them. He took leave from work. He would go to Moscow with his daughter himself. He wouldn't leave her alone. If Milana feels better, we'll go to the zoo, to Red Square. Great vacation. Milana was admitted to the day hospital. Every morning, David took his daughter to the clinic. She underwent procedures. Then he picked her up and took her to the hotel. He hoped that she will feel better after rehabilitation, as had happened before. But this time it didn't work out. Milana remained weak, stopped drawing. It was hard for her to hold pencils. She lay in bed all day. How could they go to the zoo? David asked the doctors. They shrugged. The disease was taking its toll. It happens. Supportive therapy wasn't radical measures. Targeted help, experiments were needed. It all came down to the fact that she urgently needed to see Dr. Davis or Dr. Miller. David tried to get his daughter admitted to the hospital for round-the-clock observation. Her condition was worsening. The father was afraid that one day something terrible would happen and he would be alone and unable to help. No bets, the doctors replied. There are no urgent indications. The condition is stable, expected. Emergency help is not needed. David understood. Milana was fading. If he didn't arrange something with one of the professors now, while they were in Moscow, if he took his daughter home, nothing would help her anymore. The thought made him break out in a sweat. He decided he wouldn't leave. He would ambush the doctors, break into the operating room, force them to admit Milana, let him serve time later, but he would get what he wanted. And now David was sitting on the bench in the park for this very reason. Opposite, across the road, was the hospital where Dr. Miller worked. Dr. Davis had gone to a conference. Only Dr. Miller remained. The workload had increased. David knew what he looked like. Middle-aged, dark hair, attentive brown eyes, a determined chin. David had been staking out Dr. Miller for several days. He waited until Milana fell asleep and went to his post. He couldn't be away for long. Milana, he didn't want to leave her alone. But while she was sleeping, he could keep watch. He hadn't managed to catch Dr. Miller. The plan was unsuccessful. He needed to get into the hospital, find the doctor, force him to admit Milana. First beg, then threaten. The desperate father was ready for anything. Anxious thoughts swirled in his head. Inside him lived anger, hatred, envy toward the parents of healthy children. David himself didn't like these feelings. He had always considered himself a good person. That's how his grandmother had raised him. But he was ready for terrible things, even crimes. Anything, just to save Milana. If necessary, he would seize one of Dr. Miller's relatives, and then he would have to admit Milana. The consequences for him would be terrible. But oh well. At least Milana would stay alive, if he was lucky. Why are you so sad? A clear, ringing voice pulled him from his dark thoughts. David turned around. A thin little boy of about 7 was sitting next to him on the bench. The child was a little older than Milana. Big blue eyes, a nose covered in freckles, a curious gaze. His long, light brown hair was sticking up. It clearly needed a haircut. His clothes were old and worn, but his sweater was neatly darned. It was clear that his parents were caring, but very poor. Why are you so sad? The boy asked again. Me? No, I'm not sad. Just thinking. No, I can see you are. Don't worry, everything will be okay. It often happens like this. First it's bad, and then everything gets better. Sooner or later. You're right, David smiled. It was impossible not to smile looking into those clear blue eyes. The boy was sincere, bright, real, radiating a special energy, an amazing child. Why are you walking here alone? Where are your parents? David looked around. The boy was too young to be walking alone. He was careless, sitting down next to an unfamiliar adult. Alone. Grandmother is sick today, and I came here to see a friend. He waits for me every day. I help him, and he helps me. It sounds like you and he are true friends, David smiled. Keep in touch. That kind of friendship is very rare. I know, the boy smiled. He was missing 2 front teeth. His smile was funny and touching. A wonderful boy, easygoing and sociable. The only thing that bothered him was that such a young child was walking alone. Grandmother is sick and your parents are working, probably? Is that why you're here alone? Does grandmother know where her grandson is? She knows, yes. Don't worry, I'm big now. I understand everything. And I know how to cross the road, and I watch out for bad people. David, I'm a stranger to you, someone you don't know, and you're talking to me like this. You're a good person, the little boy stated with childish spontaneity. You can see it right away. Tears welled up in David's eyes. A trusting, sweet child, calling him good, not knowing about his dark thoughts, about his readiness for crime. Anyone could deceive him like this. A defenseless, trusting little one. Still, it's better not to talk to strangers. People, come in all kinds. Oh, my parents didn't say. The boy shook his head. I don't even know them. I don't remember my parents. My grandmother is raising me. And my parents died when I was very little. They were in an accident, and that was it. I was in the car too, but I survived and wasn't even hurt. Grandmother said, angels save me, because I still have to grow up and make this world better. That's quite a story you have, David said, looking at the boy with different eyes. Life must not be easy for him, but he was so open, kind, and sociable despite it. He was going to save the world. My name is Matthew, by the way. The young interlocutor introduced himself. And yours is David, Uncle David. A woman with a cart, a pastry vendor, walked past. Buns, sweet buns, hot from the oven. David's eyes didn't miss the look Matthew gave the cart. And then it struck him. The child was from a poor family. He must be hungry. Matthew, did you have breakfast today? My friend treated me to a sandwich, but that was a long time ago. The boy clearly wanted to eat, but was shy to ask. David went up to the woman, bought 2 fluffy raisin buns. He handed one to Matthew, who immediately sank his teeth into it like a hungry wolf cub. It was a pleasure to watch him eat with such appetite, especially after David had tried unsuccessfully to feed Milana. She ate nothing at all. Is the second bun for you? Matthew clarified. Why aren't you eating? It's very tasty. No, it's for my daughter, David replied, thinking that perhaps Milana would want to try the fragrant pastry. He would be happy if she could manage even a quarter. You have a daughter? What's her name? How old is she? Milana. She just turned 6. Why didn't you bring her to the park with you? The weather is so nice we could have walked, run around. You see, Matthew, Milana is sick. A fever. Naive little one. He probably didn't know yet that there were illnesses much worse. No, it's much more serious. If it were just a fever, it's related to blood, something hematological. David stared at the little one with wide eyes. How did he know such words? The phrase didn't fit the appearance of the freckled, gap-toothed boy. Wow! Where did you get such knowledge? My friend knows a lot about illnesses, he sometimes tells me, Matthew explained. You know, your daughter needs fresh air and good emotions then. I agree, David sighed. Matthew surprised him more and more. But Milana is too weak. It's hard for her to walk. Then let me come to your place. Do you live far? I want to become a doctor when I grow up. I already know how to heal a little. It always helps grandmother when I put my hand on her forehead. She says she feels better right away. And won't your grandmother mind if you visit strangers? She won't, the little boy assured him. She knows I understand people and avoid bad ones from a mile away. On the one hand, this amazing boy was right. Milana needed positive emotions. David didn't know how to cheer up his daughter. She was indifferent to toys. Cartoons didn't interest her. She didn't eat sweets. Milana lacked interaction with other children. She dreamed of going to kindergarten, playing with the neighborhood kids, but it didn't work out. She was too weak. And here was Matthew with such an offer. There was something strange about him going to a hotel with someone else's child. He might even face punishment, although he had no intention of doing anything bad to Matthew. Quite the opposite. And yet the man decided to take the risk. Matthew. He was so radiant, open, sensitive. If he could cheer Milana up even a little, then the risk would be worth it. When David and Matthew entered the room, Milana was already awake. She was lying there staring blankly at the ceiling. Seeing the unfamiliar boy her father had brought, she livened up. Her eyes lit up with interest. "Who is this?" she asked, propping herself up on her elbows. "I'm Matthew," the guest announced. "Your dad and I became friends. I've come to visit you. And I'm Milana. I know. Uncle David told me. I know you're sick." "Yes," the girl nodded sadly. "Well, don't worry. Doctors are good now. They cure everything. You know, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor too. And I'm an artist." "Do you draw well?" Milana replied proudly. It was pleasant for David to hear that intonation. Before, she had been indifferent to everything, but here she was so lively and engaged in the conversation. "Dad, get my folder." Matthew climbed onto the blanket with Milana. She sat up and began showing him her masterpieces. Matthew looked at the drawings with interest, and Milana told him something about their subjects. They were happy and interested together. David smiled, looking at his animated daughter, and went into the room. Maybe seeing Matthew, Milana will eat well too? Children's laughter occasionally drifted from the room. It was amazing because Milana had rarely smiled lately. Amazing and wonderful at the same time. Then David walked Matthew to his home, an old 5-story building behind the park. Milana had fallen asleep by the time the guests left. The illness took a lot of her strength. "Milana is very sick," Matthew said sadly on the way. "I'll ask my friend how to cure her. He'll help. He's so smart, you know." David just smiled. Naive little one. He probably thinks some older boy who's read smart books is a genius. Funny, but also sad. It's a shame Matthew was mistaken. David wished the child's words were true. "Can I come to your place tomorrow too?" "Come," David smiled. "At the same time, not earlier, Milana will be at the hospital." "Okay, I'll definitely come. You'll help me a lot if you stay with her while I run some errands." David realized that while Matthew was with them, he would have a chance to go to Dr. Miller's house. Maybe he could catch him, talk to him, convince him. "I'll definitely stay with Milana. She's such a good girl, not like Susie the show-off from the yard. Milana really does draw beautifully." The next day, Matthew kept his promise, knocking exactly at the appointed hour. Milana was waiting for him, having prepared a board game. David met Matthew and went to the other end of the city, to Dr. Miller's house in a prestigious area. David took a waiting position, but he couldn't wait long. He couldn't keep Matthew until late at night. His grandmother was surely worried. Milana was sleeping again when David returned. She was even paler. She got worse. Matthew raised his eyes to David, full of despair. "Can I come to your place tomorrow with my friend? He'll definitely help her. He's the smartest and kindest in the world." Of course, of course. Come with your friend," the distressed David allowed. "The more people, the merrier. Milana will be happy to see your friend." "You too," Matthew promised. "You'll be happy to see him too, you'll see." During the night, Milana got worse. Her temperature rose. She started shivering. David managed to stop the attack by calling an ambulance, but the doctor said that supportive measures, just a little longer, and neither pills nor medicine would be able to handle the attacks. Milana was sleeping, and he held her thin little hand, stroked her fingers, and thought about where to find Dr. Miller. He could have gone to the hospital, threatened, persuaded, but there were many people there. Security. They would quickly escort him out, call the police. No, he needed to ambush the doctor somewhere else. The next day started as usual. David woke his daughter, tried to feed her porridge. Milana managed a couple of spoonfuls, then refused. David called a taxi, carried his daughter in his arms. They went to the clinic. Milana was taken to the elevator on a gurney. Procedures awaited her. David spent several hours in the lobby talking to the mothers of day patients. It was mostly mothers there, attentive, caring, loving. David thought he didn't measure up to them. Women were better with small children. It was a shame his little girl was deprived of maternal warmth. Then Milana, despite her fatigue, asked her father, would Matthew come soon? The boy was late. David thought his friend wouldn't come today. Maybe his grandmother didn't let him. Maybe he got caught up playing. He was sociable. He had tons of friends. But the long-awaited knock on the door came. Interesting. Was Matthew alone or with a friend? At the threshold, Matthew was smiling broadly, and behind him, an adult man was shifting from foot to foot. And not just any man. Black eyes, a determined chin, chiseled cheekbones. It was Dr. Miller. David could barely stand from the surge of emotions. What was happening? How was this possible? "Hi, Uncle David," Matthew said. "Meet him. This is my friend, Uncle Andrew. Remember, you said I could come with him? He'll help Milana." A year and a half had passed since that amazing day. David was in Moscow again, in the same park, near the same bench. It was spring outside, mid-April. The just sprouting greenery, a clear blue sky, bright sun. David sat on the bench, looking fondly at Matthew and Milana. The children had drawn hopscotch on the asphalt and were jumping absorbedly. Both had grown, matured. Matthew was almost a teenager. The same open gaze, the same charming, no longer gap-toothed smile. He had become taller, stronger, more robust. It was good that he hadn't lost his spontaneity and openness. He would probably remain like that forever. Kind, attentive, sensitive. Milana was already 7. David hadn't hoped a year and a half ago that she would go to a regular school. At best, homeschooling. At worst, it was still hard for David to think about that now. "You beat me again!" Matthew's voice was filled with admiration. Milana smiled proudly. David chuckled. He saw everything. Matthew always let Milana win so she would feel strong and agile. The boy knew she needed positive emotions and self-belief. So he tried. He acted as if he was 10 years older than Milana, a little sage. On that memorable day, David couldn't believe for a long time that Matthew's friend was Professor Miller himself. The boy had mentioned that his friend understood medicine, but he hadn't said it was one of the most famous professors in the country. Dr. Miller turned out to be a wonderful person. David told him about his trouble. While the men talked, the children played a board game. Dr. Miller was horrified by how difficult it was for people to get an appointment with him. He hadn't known about the situation and decided to create his own website so patients could contact him directly. After a thorough examination, the professor developed a treatment plan. The treatment was expensive, but Dr. Miller personally secured government subsidies for the girl. Milana immediately began to recover. They couldn't get rid of the disease completely. She would have to take medication her whole life. But she was no different from ordinary healthy children. She became lively, noisy, energetic. She even started being mischievous, which pleased David. That meant his daughter had enough energy for childish antics, and that was happiness. Milana started school at the proper time, even 2 schools, including art school. Every year they had to go to Moscow for rehabilitation and checkups. Both daughter and father were happy about this circumstance. After all, Matthew lived in Moscow, the amazing boy who had played a key role in Milana's fate. He also eagerly awaited the arrival of Uncle David and his best friend. How did Matthew know Dr. Miller? How did the professor and the boy from a poor family become friends? Matthew met Andrew at the hospital where the boy's grandmother had been taken with a heart attack. The little boy was very worried, crying. Dr. Miller was the one who could help Matthew. He talked to him, gave him water. They talked for a long time. Matthew's grandmother was both laughing and crying at that time. When the danger passed, Dr. Miller delivered the good news. By then, the boy and the man had already become friends in an incredible way. Matthew managed to tell his new acquaintance that he intended to become a doctor. So they had even more topics for conversation. Dr. Miller was touched by the fate of the radiant little boy. He didn't want him to end up in an orphanage while his grandmother was sick, and took him in. Dr. Miller's wife gladly welcomed the guest. They had a son the same age, and the boys got along well. So since then, Matthew came to visit his friend, Uncle Andrew, at the hospital. And he, despite being busy, never refused the boy conversation and participated in his fate in every way, understanding that the elderly woman found it difficult to cope with her grandson alone. When Matthew, wiping away tears, told Dr. Miller about Milana, he couldn't remain indifferent, especially since it was about a disease the professor was specifically working on. David and Dr. Miller were now also on friendly terms. Andrew personally made sure his signature was always on the reports about Milana's condition. Most often, of course, the conversation was about Matthew. The boy's fate was now important to both of them. A wonderful kid, David said. I wish I had a son like that. Clever and most importantly, sensitive. Dr. Miller agreed. The most necessary combination for a future doctor. He will become a doctor who saves many lives.